Hello there, and welcome back to my channel. I'm your humble host, Elias, and today I'm going to be posting a short review of the book, The Hellbound Heart by Clive Barker. I picked up this book because I've heard that the Hellraiser movies are good. It's a very short book. You can see it's only, I think, 160 some pages, 164 pages. You can also see that the print is pretty large, which is good for me, who hasn't read a full proper book in like 4 months. So this was nice to jump back into reading real books. This book originally was published in 1986. According to this, the movie is from 1987, so it came out only a year later, interestingly. Which, again, I haven't seen the movie, but I've heard it's good. And I've heard it's very gory. And that is one thing I can say about this book. It is gross. It is nasty. It is grody. It is icky. It is all of those things. So if you're into that, this is definitely the book for you. If you like body horror and kind of just looking into like the fucked up, perverse side of humanity, and you don't want a super thick read, say this is definitely something to look into. It's definitely like has the vibes of like a book written in the 80s, like they all, and I think you see that with modern books. Modern books definitely have the feel of they were written by modern people. Like it's the language they use, it's the prose, it's the syntax, it's everything. And I will say I do really dig the cover of this. There was another Clive Barker book at Barnes & Noble where I got this that had the same sort of design or like style of the cover. And I think it really does well to sort of articulate the vibe of the book. It's maybe a little bit more of a clinical vibe than you get from the book. The book is, like I said, very gross, very visceral, very, it's definitely got a similar vibe to the movie. And overall, I think it says a lot without having to take up a lot of space. It's very good at like world building without having to take like pages or chapters to explain like what the Cenobites are. Like we know, oh, they're demons of pleasure. Like that's basically all you need to know. It gets across what you need to know very well without like bogging down in any like pointless details. The book isn't about the Cenobites. It's about the people that come in contact with the Cenobites, and those are the important things. And I think that is what's hard to do, especially in horror, is to build an effective story in a short amount of pages. And I think that's something that Clive Barker really does very effectively. It's not a book that leaves you feeling like bad, like, ugh, why did I put my energy into consuming this? It has a very satisfying ending, I would say. Like, this is one of the reasons I don't really get into horror all that much, is that a lot of stories end very, horror specifically ends very bleak and depressing. And I do like that this isn't one of those stories. Like, it kind of almost subverts horror tropes, which I don't know what the horror tropes of the 80s were, but I know now, at least, it's very common to see the bad guy win in horror movies, or the bad guy get away with it. But in this case, the Cenobites very much aren't the antagonists, really. They're more just kind of almost plot points rather than characters. And the antagonist is really Frank, the guy who dies at the beginning, and then the whole book is about his brother's wife trying to bring him back to life. And that guy, very satisfying ending for him. And the girl, who starts out as a little bit more like a tertiary main character, gets away basically fine. Deeply traumatized, of course. Of course, nobody gets out of a horror story peachy keen, but she's not dragged to hell or to the schism, I think is what they call it, where the Cenobites are from. Definitely also Clive Barker is very good at introducing very interesting concepts. Like the Cenobites themselves are a very cool concept, but it doesn't feel like he just like gives them to you then snatches them away, or like, again, goes too deep into the world building to the extent where it just gets boring. I think I underlined a really good passage. So this is sort of the internal monologue of Frank as he's being tortured by the Cenobites. He says, no, his real error had been the naive belief that his definition of pleasure significantly overlapped with that of the Cenobites, which I think is very interesting, also just from my personal neuroses of like what even is pain and pleasure and where is the line. And I feel like the Cenobites are very interesting, like dissection of that. How the Cenobites aren't even really a malevolent force. At least with Frank at the beginning, they don't do anything until he's like, yes, give it to me. And then they go hard. But I think they ask him like multiple times, like, you sure, dude? You sure, dog? You want this? And I think it's mostly because they're fucking with him, because later in the book we do see that they go after Kirsty without her having really consented to it. And I think they just know that Frank really wants it and he's gonna consent to it. So it's more fun for them if they play with him a little bit. But I do like that at the beginning when he's like begging them. And yeah, at the end when Kirsty unlocks the... And that is a difference in the movie and the in the book. In the movie, I think it's called the Lament configuration or something, whereas in the book it's called the Lamarckand or something. It's French. And configuration or Lamarckand box. But yeah, when Kirsty unlocks it in the hospital, I do like that the Cenobites are like, she's like, wait, I think I know a guy that you're after. And she kind of switches from being a very passive character at the beginning to taking more of an active role and being like, instead of just being like, oh, I want fucking Rory to like me. And she's like, oh, I need to survive. I need to not die. And so it's very quick thinking on her part. And I do like that she kind of has a little bit more of an intelligent side to her that we don't really see earlier on in the story. I think it's also partially because a lot of the characters are very underdeveloped, but again, 164 pages, you're not going to have super in-depth characterizations. I do kind of think it's funny that, like, in a lot of horror, you see the woman as just, she's just the wife. She doesn't really have any motivation outside of that, other than to be basically a victim of whatever's going on. And in this one, the husband, Rory, kind of takes that role, which I kind of enjoy. You don't really ever get to look inside his psyche because he's never a point of view character. So we get to see what Julia is going through and how she's experiencing her loveless marriage. And we kind of see some of that just in how Rory acts, but we never like view his internal monologue. So he very much just kind of feels like his motivation is that he likes his wife and he doesn't want her to leave him. And then he gets killed off screen like a bitch. So he got fridged. It doesn't have any explicit sexual violence. It's got very strong themes of sexual violence without like ever having a rape scene or, you know, showing a person being sexually assaulted. It's just sexual violence is definitely a theme of the book. Very rambly, non-coherent review of this book, but overall I would say if you have a pretty strong stomach for gore, because it definitely is very grody, especially if you really like the Hellraiser movies but you haven't had a chance to look at the books or the book. So I definitely recommend this. I think I gave it 5 stars on Goodreads just because generally I find it, I don't really have any complaints about it. It's just a really good, fast read. I got through it in one sitting. It's really effective horror. It's really effective body horror. It's horrifying. It's grotesque. And overall, yeah, I just suggest that if you are interested in the Hellraiser movies, in body horror, in a little bit of torture porn, in themes of sexual violence explored in a short, snappy story, then check out The Hellbound Heart by Clive Barker.